All right, then. How are we doing? All right, the spaceport, a national resource. Midway between Jacksonville and Miami on Florida's east coast, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration operates the huge spaceport from which astronauts travel to the moon. Man's first flight around the moon in December 1968 and the first lunar landing in July 1969 began from the launch facilities near the Atlantic Ocean shoreline and assured the Kennedy Space Center a place in history. Evocative as they were, these achievements will be overshadowed in importance by later space explorations if they yield evidence of life elsewhere in the universe. The sprawling launch installation contrasts sharply in physical settings and early history with the gargantuan engineering creations which transformed virtually wild terrain blanketed with pimento, palm, and marshes into the operational base for manned and unmanned space flights. North Merritt Island was partially developed when the United States embarked upon Project Apollo, the manned lunar expedition, in 1961. Archaeologists uncovered traces of human activity predating the Christian era, burial mounds and refuse piles left by Indians and indications of French and Spanish forays before the birth of the Republic. Dredges working the Banana River during the construction turned up petrified bones of prehistoric mammals. Professor Charles Fairbanks of the University of Florida remarked that the Space Center occupies one of the locations where Western civilization came to the New World. Now it is the place from which our civilization will go out to other worlds. Immense steel and concrete structures large enough to accommodate rockets that can propel man 400,000 kilometers, 250,000 miles from Earth, and spacecraft containing life support systems for the journey to the moon house engineers and technicians employing complex equipment to test, assemble, and launch these space-age machines. Among the seeming contradictions are premier signs indicating that the site is also a natural wildlife refuge, where astronauts train and immense rockets shake the earth with their power. Duck hunters call their quarry, fishermen ply the waters, surfers slide over ocean waves, scouts camp overnight, seasonal workers harvest oranges and grapefruit, beekeepers collect honey, and thousands of curious visitors tour the base in air-conditioned buses. This is the map of the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Kennedy Air Force Station, and surrounding communities. You can see that? Right there? That's it right there. A quiet, soft-spoken engineer, Dr. Kurt H. DeBus, foremost authority on launch technologies, supervised the planning of the unique federal installation and directs its operation. He came to the United States at the close of the World War II as special assistant to Dr. Werner von Braun, master rocket designer, with 120 other former German scientists and engineers who voluntarily chose American citizenship. They carried forward the development of rocketry at Penn, where they dreamed of space flight and brought with them invaluable hard-won experience that facilitated the development of the rocket-powered weapons system for the national defense. Dr. DeBus played a key role in the choice of the Merritt Island site as the embarkation point for trips to the moon. The NASA Center bears little resemblance to the modest and relatively primitive facilities on Cape Kennedy across the Banana River, where he launched U.S. Army ballistic missiles, precursors of space vehicles from 1953 to 1960. During that period, the von Braun organization fabricated rockets called Redstone and Jupiter at Redstone Arsenal, Alabama, and turned them over to Dr. DeBus in his missile firing laboratory for flight tests. He would pack his bags accompanied by 75 engineers and technicians and drive with the rocket convoy to the Cape. There they checked out, erected, and launched the missile. Then they returned to Alabama to wait the next rocket off the line. When the Army later contracted with Chrysler Corporation to produce Redstones and Jupiters in Michigan, the launch team moved permanently to the Cape Kennedy area to conduct flight testing and assist in training U.S. and foreign military crews to handle these weapons in Europe. Since 1960, some of the rockets and spacecraft required for the space program grew so large that they can be transported only by ocean barges or cargo aircraft known as guppies, which provide double or triple the normal cargo space. Saturn and Apollo stages arrived from the manufacturing and testing sites in California, Mississippi, Alabama, and Long Island. The smaller Army rockets were launched from complexes consisting of blockhouses, which protected the 50-man firing team, launch pads, and movable gantries. Today's Launch Control Center for Skylab houses a firing team for more than 400 engineers. The pads have become massive concrete pyramids, and the gantry stands 136 meters, which is 446 feet tall, and weighs 5,700 metric tons, is 6,300 tons. The launch crew of the 1950s multiplied many times into an organization which at peak in September 1968 employed 26,500 administrators, engineers, and technicians, and has since reduced to 14,000, most of whom are employed by aerospace firms building launch vehicles and spacecraft for NASA, and the other companies providing common services to the government, country, and their industrial teammates. The Civil Service Group of 2,500 plans, coordinates, and supervises the total effort. The phenomenal upsurge in manpower occurred from 1962 onward as Project Apollo attained full speed. The late President John F. Kennedy fired public imagination in May 1961 by announcing the United States would fly men to the moon and back within the decade. His challenge elicited congressional support for the program, which would require rockets far more powerful than any then available, and spacecraft designed to protect 3 men from the hostile environment to outer space during the 800,000 kilometer, 500,000 mile journey to and from the moon. A suitable location had to be found to assemble, service, and launch novel space transportation systems, which were then on the drawing boards. Cape Kennedy, 17,000 acres, had been intensively utilized for launching rockets for the military and NASA. These facilities proved adequate for Project Mercury missions flown on Redstone and Atlas rockets, and for unmanned scientific missions employing Thor, Agena, Atlas Agena, and Delta and Centaur vehicles. As NASA came into existence in October 1958, charged with conducting the National Space Program, the Army had begun construction of a large complex from which to launch Saturn vehicles. NASA completed this task and built a second adjoining complex. Both could service Saturn rockets 67 meters or 220 feet tall, and that developed 7 million neutrons, which is 1,600,000 pounds of thrust, and propelled 18 metric tons, which is 20 tons, into Earth's orbit. That capability would be needed to carry either the Apollo Command and Service Module or a Lunar Module, but it was not significant to carry all three. Dr. DeBus, representing NASA, and Lieutenant General Leighton I. Davis, representing the Department of Defense, organized a joint study to find a new launch site for the Saturn V vehicles, which would develop almost 5 times more thrust than the Saturn, then reaching the flight phase. They considered Hawaii, the California coast, an island off the coast of Georgia, Texas Islands in the Caribbean, and Merritt Island. Next to Cape Kennedy. An island at sea offered certain advantages. There would be no danger of spent or partially spent rockets falling back into populated territories, but to attract and retain a large technically oriented workforce in such a remote area would pose many problems in addition to the logistics aspects. There must be a community environment for employees and their families with schools, churches, stores, and other institutions and conveniences expected by a launch organization with a high percentage of skilled engineers. The study concluded that Merritt Island offered compelling advantages. Communities within driving range, the city like Daytona Beach, Vero Beach, and Orlando could house the expanding workforce. Here it would be possible to utilize the suburban technical facilities of the Atlantic Missile Range organized by the Defense Department for the military rocket program under management of the U.S. Air Force. By sharing these systems, NASA could avoid costly duplications. Only at this location could the same NASA launch organization continue operations on the Cape Kennedy complexes while building the spaceport and achieve effective integration of the overall space launch activities. Dr. DeBus and General Davis recommended acquisitions of the north part of the Merritt Island. The choice was promptly endorsed by NASA and the Defense Department. Congress authorized NASA to acquire the property with an implicit understanding that the spaceport would be available for possible future military requirements as well as for the NASA program. The space agency began its acquisition process in 1962, taking title to 83,894 acres. By